Hey, special educators, I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome to the Special Educators Resource Room. If you're like me, you're always looking for ways to save time and streamline your work. That's why this podcast was created, to give you the systems and solutions you need to get your time back. Tune in for tips, tricks, and tools that will help you manage your workload and make the most of your time. Whether you're brand new or experienced, all are welcome in the Special Educators Resource Room. How do you fit everything in to an already very busy day? Hey, special educators, it's Jennifer from Positively Learning, and I want to kick off a brand new series. It's called How Do You Fit It In? And it's for busy special educators who are focused in on their students' IEP goals and objectives. However, there's so many other things that are impacting their students, and we can't just simply act like those things don't exist. I'm talking things like SEL, life skills, OT, speech and language, and supporting sensory needs. It's something I thought about all the time, and I'm going to be speaking from my own experience. I know that every special educator is in a unique position. I don't think there's any special educator who has the exact same job as another, but I still hope these tips will be helpful to you. Let's kick it off with a big one. Social emotional learning. That had such an impact on every student I was working with every day. Now I'm going to be speaking from a resource room setting. Although I taught in multiple settings, I'm going to be thinking about what I was doing in the resource room. If you looked at a typical day and the IEP goals and objectives we were focused on, technically it would be about 2/3 reading intervention, 1/3 math. But if you looked at this same chart, there are some days behavior was 100%. So even though I was focused in on reading and math, there's no way I could ignore what was going on with behavior. I tend to approach behavior as skill development. For example, if I'm seeing a student really struggling, it's something we definitely don't want to be seeing. I immediately launch into what skills does this student need? What can we introduce? Give time to practice, role play, develop, reinforce with positive feedback in a safe space so that this student has that skill. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it definitely helped my students, but it also really helped me. It helped me stay very calm because I could help support that student rather than react to the behavior that was happening. But I still need to answer the question, how do you fit it all in? So if you listened to my holiday episode, it was episode 50. I talked about how we didn't drop everything when a holiday or special celebration came up, but instead I did my best to embed it into the existing routines we already had. And I did a very similar thing with social emotional learning. How do we fit in SEL into an already busy day? Look at your existing routines and see where it might fit in. For example, are you pulling a morning meeting? Do you have an end of day routine? In our setting, we had two major transitions. There was actually transitions going on all the time, kind of like a revolving door in the resource room. But there were two major transitions that all students experienced. And that was in the morning and again after lunch and recess. And we had routines in place. Otherwise, that would feel like pure chaos. One of the routines that I always depended on was having students enter the resource room and come to the small carpet area. And we would do some type of meeting activity, whether it was just introducing what's happening in our small groups that day. We would do a read aloud if appropriate. We would have a class meeting where we are having talking points, anything that would gather us in a community feeling. Well, this was a super easy place to embed SEL because it was already a routine that my students were familiar with. My favorite way to do this was to use read alouds. I have a long blog post that lists out our favorite read alouds for this very situation. It was our restorative practice circles that we had, and I selected 20 books. And they're going to be pretty common titles that you recognize, like Enemy Pie and Jabari Jumps and The Invisible Boy. I have a list of 20 books and they have talking points for each one of these books. You could stick with a book for a couple of days or switch them out every day, but this was something that really supported my students. I think that they could relate to a character in a book versus me just coming at them saying like, how do you feel? Are you doing this? No, they could instead listen to a story about Jabari, who is feeling a little bit of fear and not so confident in his abilities. Maybe my students can relate to that, and that can kick off a conversation. That was one way that we incorporated SEL into everyday learning. We used our routines, and then we used read alouds during those routines to help support my students and kick off the conversation. How do we fit SEL into an already busy day? Think about what already exists at your school that you can jump on board with. Is there an SEL curriculum? Our school adopted Second Steps. However, we only devoted about half an hour every other week at the time. Hopefully, it's much more now. And that half hour wasn't really sacred. It was often the first thing to be dropped when there was testing or some other change in the schedule. Or if it was happening, it didn't mean my students were experiencing it. They may be absent or being pulled for a small group. But that curriculum did exist. So I did look into having the posters and the other visuals and getting a set for the resource room. Spoiler, it never happened. There wasn't available resources for me, but I thought it would be really great. I looked online trying to find something so my students could see similar images wherever they went in the school. Is there something that exists like that at your school? Could you ask the school psychologist, social worker, school counselor, anyone who's working with the school population? Do they have anything that you could use? Do they have any recommendations? It would be fantastic for students to see that familiar messaging wherever they go. Plus, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And speaking of reinventing the wheel, leverage ready-made resources. I have an entire curriculum that I am so excited about. It's all about SEL, but here's why I'm excited about it and what I think makes it a little bit different. I made each lesson standalone. There's 40 lessons. They're standalone, which means you can start with lesson 1, lesson 10, lesson 16. They do not depend on each other. And I think that is so helpful because it's realistic. Some students need some things, other students don't need it, and there's not always an opportunity for that continuity. Another reason I love this resource is it's student friendly and it uses task boxes. So the task boxes are intended to be used to introduce the skill in a small group, and there's task boxes for independent work. So you kind of get the best of both. Each lesson could be taught in about 10 minutes, but there's also extensions. You could make this 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever works for your small groups. There's an opening, there's guided practice and concept development. Then there's a closing with a critical thinking question that's appropriate for age groups K through 2. There's also an extension. There's 2 different task boxes and suggestions on how to use them. And then each lesson plan also uses the task box for a quick check for understanding or assessment. And this is all in one lesson, and there's 40 lessons. Here are the topics that my students really needed. Identifying basic and complex emotions, recognizing facial expressions, using words to express feelings, understanding others' feelings, empathy, kindness, what makes a good friend, building trust, personal space, gratitude, celebrating differences, respect for property, self-calming strategies, positive self-talk, self-control, self-regulation, using I statements, asking for help and accepting help, size of the problem, conflict resolution, coping strategies, growth mindset, teasing versus bullying, peer pressure, and there's so many more. There's 40 topics in all. If you're listening to this and thinking, there's no way I can pull another small group in our busy day, or maybe you're not in a place where you can pull small groups, there are also 80 task boxes that come with these sets. There's 2 for each topic. Use these task boxes in the small group or as part of your independent work system. Ideally, a little bit of both. I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can get a closer look at the editable lesson plans for you and all of the task box resources for your students. So how do you fit in SEL into an already busy day? You know your students need it, but you have negative extra time to deal with. Number 1, incorporate SEL into what already exists. If you're doing a morning meeting, incorporate an SEL topic. If you're using read alouds or you have other routines in your day that are already established, how can you embed SEL into what already exists? Number 2, see what's already happening in your school. What's already available to you? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Is there a curriculum that your students have some exposure to, whether it's in the gen ed classroom or it's with a related service provider? Can you hop on board with that also? Number 3, leverage ready-made resources. If your school does not have access to a curriculum, that doesn't mean you skip SEL you know your students desperately need, or that you have to sit down and write it yourself. I have a ready-made set of lesson plans. I call it the SEL Toolkit, and it's task box lesson plans. There's 40 editable lessons on various topics, and there's 2 task boxes for every lesson. There's also data tracking, extensions, read aloud suggestions, and even audio teaching tips from yours truly for each and every lesson. I will put the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and good luck fitting it all in. I know you can do it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time in the Special Educators Resource Room. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe buttons so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.